June 5, 1981. A brief notice in the New York Times announced, almost nonchalantly, that 5 homosexual men have been diagnosed with a rare form of pneumonia. The words were a whisper in a world that still believed the worst of disease lived far away, yet that whisper would soon become a scream that shook the very foundations of public health, politics, and society. In the early 1980s, the United States was still riding the wave of optimism that followed the eradication of smallpox and the triumph over polio. The medical establishment, bolstered by new antibiotics and vaccines, felt secure. Then, in the summer of 1982, doctors in Los Angeles began noticing a pattern. Young, otherwise healthy men were presenting with Kaposi's sarcoma, a rare cancer that had been confined to elderly Mediterranean men and immunosuppressed transplant patients. Simultaneously, reports emerged of unexplained cases of pneumocystis pneumonia, a lung infection that should never have afflicted individuals with intact immune systems. The disease did not recognize borders. By the end of 1983, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, had compiled a case series that linked these disparate illnesses under a single, invisible enemy. They coined the term gay-related immune deficiency, a label that, while scientifically convenient, carried a stigma that would later hinder both public awareness and funding. Researchers soon realized that the condition was not limited to gay men. Intravenous drug users, hemophiliacs receiving clotting factor concentrates, and eventually heterosexual partners were being infected at alarming rates. Behind the headlines, a relentless scientific race began. In 1984, the French virologist Luc Montagnier isolated a novel retrovirus from a patient's lymph node, naming it lymphadenopathy-associated virus LAV. In the United States, Dr. Robert Gallo of the National Cancer Institute identified a similar virus, which he called human T-cell lymphotropic virus EI, HTLV-EI. The two groups announced their findings within weeks of each other, sparking a bitter dispute over priority that would later become known as the virus patent war. What mattered most, however, was the confirmation that a single pathogen, later christened human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV, was responsible for the cascade of immune failure that culminated in acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS. The first clinical trial to test an antiviral agent began in 1985, led by Dr. William Haseltine at the National Cancer Institute. The drug, azacitidine, was originally synthesized in the 1960s as a cancer chemotherapy, but its ability to inhibit reverse transcriptase, a key enzyme in the HIV life cycle, made it a candidate for treatment. Early results were promising. Patients receiving AZ showed delayed progression to AIDS and modest increases in CD4 plus T cell counts. Yet the drug's toxicity, high cost, and limited availability meant that only a fraction of those who needed it could access it. The trial also highlighted a crucial ethical dilemma: how to allocate a scarce, life-extending medication in a climate of fear and discrimination. While researchers labored in labs, families faced a stark reality at the bedside. Autopsies became a grim ritual, revealing the internal devastation wrought by HIV. Pathologists discovered a characteristic depletion of CD4 plus lymphocytes in lymph nodes, massive infiltration of the brain's white matter by infected macrophages, and opportunistic infections that turned ordinary organs into battlegrounds. One of the most harrowing findings was the presence of giant cells in the brain, a hallmark of HIV-associated dementia that explained the cognitive decline observed in many patients. These post-mortem examinations not only confirmed the systemic nature of the disease, but also underscored the urgency of developing both diagnostic tools and therapeutic strategies. The political response, however, lagged behind the science. In the United States, the Reagan administration initially dismissed the crisis as a gay lifestyle disease, refusing to allocate federal funds for research or public education. The National Institutes of Health (NIH) budget for AIDS research remained stagnant throughout the early 1980s, even as death tolls rose sharply. Activist groups such as ACT UP, AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, emerged from the shadows, staging die-ins at the FDA, confronting pharmaceutical executives and demanding faster drug approval processes. Their relentless pressure forced the FDA to adopt the parallel track policy, allowing experimental drugs to be accessed outside of clinical trials, a landmark decision that would later accelerate the rollout of antiretroviral therapies. By 1990, the world finally recognized the magnitude of the crisis. The World Health Organization estimated that over 20 million people were living with HIV, and the death rate was climbing to more than 1 million per year. The introduction of combination antiretroviral therapy, commonly referred to as HAART, highly active antiretroviral therapy, in 1996 marked a turning point. By targeting multiple stages of the viral replication cycle, HAART transformed HIV from a death sentence into a manageable chronic condition. Life expectancy for those on effective treatment rose dramatically, and new infections began to decline in regions with robust prevention programs. Yet the legacy of the early years remains a cautionary tale. The delay in recognizing and responding to HIV/AIDS exposed how prejudice can cloud public health decisions, how bureaucratic inertia can cost lives, and how vital community activism is in steering policy. The autopsies that once cataloged the disease's devastation now serve as historical documents, reminding future generations that the battle against emerging pathogens begins not only in the microscope, but also in the halls of government and the hearts of societies. Subscribe to the Autopsy Files for more stories like this.